Hello everyone, this is Miss McKeever here, and today we're going to talk about the French Wars of Religion. When we've talked in the past, we've talked about the notion that Charles is trying to end the religious violence that exists in France at this time. And unfortunately, the Peace of Augsburg doesn't really solve that problem. In fact, it's going to make it worse in a lot of different ways. The situation is a little bit more calm now when it comes to Lutherans in the Holy Roman Empire, but unfortunately, if you are not Lutheran, you don't have any of the political recognition that you need to really be safe in your life. So Calvinists, Anabaptists, who are still French at this point and not completely dead, and Zwingliism is really struggling to try to find any sort of recognition from the various political structures of Europe. The Anglican Church is now fully cemented in England at this point. Lutheranism is in the Holy Roman Empire. But beyond that, if you're Protestant, you're kind of just out of luck right now. So these groups are going to continually be facing conflict no matter where they're at because they don't have that basic recognition that you get when it comes to Lutherans. We will see this conflict really break out in kind of two different ways. One of them's kind of peaceful, it's a transition in the arts themselves, and the other one clearly is not in various political and military conflicts that take place across Europe. But we're going to start with the positive one, the peaceful one, which is going to be the arts themselves. If you look at the pictures that you see right now, you're seeing pretty good examples of the differences of how Catholicism and Protestantism approached art during this period, and particularly when it comes to churches. During this period, we're going to see the Catholic faith really embrace Baroque art. Baroque art is going to be three-dimensional. It's going to provide the depth that you see from the Renaissance. It's really going to build upon that notion. Be extraordinarily colorful. It's kind of lavish in a lot of ways, too. It is not holding anything back. It's not minimalized to just what you need to see. It is as exuberant as humanly possible. And the idea behind it was try to make art this great vehicle for people to see the majesty of God. Celebrate the mystery of God, the all-powerful nature of God. Where Protestants are going to kind of push to the exact opposite of that. Calvinists are going to go for the most minimalist option as possible. If we flash back here, you're going to see that there is no art on the walls. You're going to see that it's going to be very plain. You're going to have just the pews that you need. You're going to have the altar to be able to carry out the ceremony, and that's really about it. And this is even a pretty lavish Protestant church in the top right here because we have stained glass windows, something that is kind of, looked down upon by certain Protestant sects. Calvinists, eventually the Puritans, they won't even allow that to take place. But this is going to be a pretty significant change in approach for the different faiths right now. Calvin himself believed that churches right now in the Catholic world distract the follower from what is actually happening during the ceremony. They aren't contributing to the experience. They're making them wander off and do other things. They're becoming like the kid who can't focus for 5 minutes at any given time. Look at the shiny picture. Look at the great art. All of these things, as opposed to paying attention to the message that is supposed to be coming out during the service itself. His phrase was that churches should not be monuments to their prosperity. They should be vehicles for prayer. And that's huge. It's a very different approach to how art is going to be looked at during this period. But that's really all we're going to talk about when it comes to art right now. We're going to focus on the conflict aspect of things. And we're going to focus almost exclusively on the French situation here. We've already talked about a little bit of what happened in Spain before. We've talked about the situation happening in the Holy Roman Empire. So let's see what's happening here in France. In France, Calvinism is going to be the huge Protestant movement that comes to power here. And it's important to remember the name given to French Calvinists because it's distinct to France. And it's important that you're able to recognize that when you see the word Huguenots, that means French Calvinists. They will play an important role not only now, but 200, 300 years down the line when we come to the French Revolution. Alright, this story begins in a truly, truly Catholic France. France has, up to this point, been one of the most devout Catholic hierarchies, Catholic bastions for the last 1,000 years. Really, since the time of Clovis and his transformation into Catholicism, it's been a very Catholic nation. And with the passage of the Edict of Fontainebleau Fontainebleau. They are hoping to purify France again of any Protestant influences back to that original Catholic mentality. And it's kind of done as a political tool. The reality is that it wasn't just for, Catholic ideology. It was because during their wars with Charles V, the French end up allowing their king to become captured. And they hoped by passing the edict and by eliminating Protestant influences in France, this will kind of, make Charles less likely to kill their king and actually allow him to return to France, being that Charles is such a passionate defender of the Catholic faith. And how do you think this goes? Well, it becomes a bit of a disaster, because the Edict of Chateaubriand is going to really kind of cement this as being a very, very strict Catholic nation. And it's going to have repercussions for that. The Edict of Chateaubriand, which is going to be a push in a much farther direction on the Catholic side, is going to make it illegal for Protestants to talk about religion at work or just in public in general. You can't bring up your faith at all if it is a non-Catholic faith. Those who are found practicing any Protestant faith, whether it's Calvinism, whether it's Lutheranism, whatever it is, they forfeit 1/3 of their possessions to the person who reported them. It doesn't take a lot to realize the disasters that is about to take place when it comes to this law. Fontainebleau was probably not a good move to begin with. I mean, it was kind of a political maneuver to get their king back. The Chateaubriand edict is going to be much, much worse. People will start turning each other in just for the opportunity to take 1/3 of someone else's possessions. And instead of, creating this religiously pure French nation, you're actually kind of creating mass paranoia and chaos across the country. And that is the exact opposite of what the leaders of France were trying to do. They were trying to solidify the country, trying to rebuild it, trying to truly make it a first-class nation, and they're failing miserably. So let's add to the story even more. We have this now significant religious turmoil that exists in the country. Well, let's add a new wrinkle to it. There are 3 major families in France: the Bourbons, the Guise, and the Montmorency. Each of these different families has a pretty legitimate claim to the French throne. At the time, though, the Montmorency are the ones in charge. The death of at the time, King Henry II is going to create a significant situation. Henry is a bit of an idiot in that he actually signs himself up to be in a tournament with fellow knights and other people to show his brave and powerful fighting nature and how awesome he is. He's a 15-year-old kid. He made a dumb decision, and that dumb decision got himself killed. He died in the tournament. And because he's 15, he doesn't really have any heirs. So we have no direct heir to the throne. So we have these 3 families now vying for power in France, and each of them has a pretty significant claim via ancestors back to the French throne, and the question is going to become who gets the first stab at this. The Guise are going to control East France, and unfortunately for them at the time, they're going to be kind of embroiled with a few of the conflicts that still exist in the Holy Roman Empire. The Bourbons have South and West France, which is largely rural, but it has a lot of money because the French coast is a great trading place in the Mediterranean. But our first stab is going to be the Montmorency. They control Paris, and that's the lifeblood of France right now. So, they will begin this problem, they will begin this reign of power with a regent mother by the name of Catherine de' Medici. Her son, Charles IX, will become the new king of France, but he's a small kid at the time and can't run the country. So she's going to become mother regent for a time being to run the country while he grows up. And Catherine is of the same family of Lorenzo de' Medici and Cosimo de' Medici. Like, these guys are extraordinarily talented and very well versed in what is going on in the world, so they're going to do whatever it takes to become successful. So, Catherine spends her life trying to figure out exactly whatever it's going to take to guarantee the success of her children and their future legitimacy to the French throne. She is going to make deal after deal, sometimes willing to just completely disregard any real sort of morality to get her end goal. Machiavelli could have been proud. First thing she'll do is she'll make concessions to the Protestants of France. She wants the Protestants to favor her because they actually have a significant amount of money. The Protestant middle class in France has weight. They have money. They have ability to make change. Once she gets that support and her son does become king, she immediately betrays all the Protestants and massacres them. Then allies with the Catholic families of France against the Protestants, knowing that a religiously unified France will be safer for her children. And this is when everything just completely goes out of control. And France enters a period of just religious wars through the next, 30, 40, 50 years of French history. And we call these the Religious Wars of France. It's pretty straightforward. Eventually peace is signed, but it's after thousands upon thousands of people have died over fights between the Calvinists and the Catholics in France. But even the peace is just temporary. It is a temporary peace in these French wars that allows Protestants to practice their faith outside of city walls. And that was a very clear point to be made, because if you're outside of city walls, you're open to attack. And it's harder for you to conspire behind protected walls of cities throughout the country. Inside of cities, you were allowed to practice your faith, but it could not be done in public. You would have to go to whatever building or whatever you're going to have your ceremony in, do it in secret, and as long as it doesn't become a public display of Protestantism, it was allowed. So, yeah, not exactly the ideal situation yet. I guess it's a move in the right direction, because the fighting is over for the time being, but it's definitely not a permanent solution to the conflict that exists in France at this time. And now things go real awry. So, after the peace is signed, Catherine is going to have, Protestant advisors tied to the court, people who are voicing the interests of Protestants. And they are going to be there trying to influence her son, who has become older and older, and almost to the point where he is ready to inherit the throne and really run the country. And Catherine's afraid of this Protestant influence on her son. Particularly a guy by the name of Coligny. He's the leader of the Calvinist church in France, and he was actually encouraging Charles to support a Protestant rebellion in the Netherlands, which is going to be a significant incident later on. We're going to talk about it later when we talk about what happens with the Spanish and the decline of the Spanish during this period. Because of this, he almost drags the French into a war that they probably weren't ready to win, because this is still the Habsburgs, this is Charles's family. They still have a ton of money, and it's only getting wealthier, and she thought he was trying to lead her son to failure. So, what does he do? What does she do? Catherine orders a massacre. She encourages all the Protestant leaders of France to get together. And when they do, she has the French army murder them all. Estimates vary a lot when it comes to how many people die. Sometimes it's 5,000, sometimes it's up to 30,000. But the true intent behind this was that she was trying to eliminate any potential rivals that will also be tied to the throne. If something were to happen to her son, we didn't want to see one of those other dynasties, the Guise or the Bourbons, to be able to come to acclaim the throne, because her other children were much younger. There was no immediate replacement if her oldest son died. Well, she fails. What ends up happening is that her goal to eliminate particularly the Bourbon heir fails miserably. And Henry, as a small child, escapes the St. Bartholomew Day massacre. And eventually, when her son does die at a young age, he's going to claim the French throne. And he's actually an extraordinarily effective leader. This new Bourbon dynasty is going to rule France up until the 1830s, 1840s. We're looking at the preeminent dynasty in French history. It begins because Henry is willing to sacrifice his own personal beliefs for what is best for the state. He's one of the first European leaders to really take this initiative and do it. He is born and raised a Protestant, but famously says, Paris is worth a mass. So he converts to Catholicism. His faith wasn't as important as ending the religious conflicts in France. And in 1598, he actually essentially creates a religiously tolerant state in France, allowing Huguenots to live in peace and establish churches in cities and practice publicly, and puts them on pretty much the same level as the Catholics in the area, which unfortunately will kind of elicit a little bit of violence, and he and his wife will be stabbed. And they're assassinated. But it doesn't end the Bourbon line. It just passes it on to his children. And that is where we kind of set up future events in France. The religious wars in France are a rough period. It's an era of political turmoil, led again probably by Catherine de' Medici's flexible morality during the period. And it eventually results in a truly effective leader, even though it is only for a short time, in Henry IV of Navarre. But he's laying the stage for a truly impressive Bourbon dynasty that is going to become a major player in European affairs. And with that, you guys have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you again.